Hey, welcome back to Mark's NOTCAST number 358 or thereabouts. Today is Tuesday, 30th of January 2024. And those of you that watched previous episodes will know I have had a shave. And the only reason for that is because I felt like it. Every once in a while, that's something you have to do. Actually, you don't have to do it. You can have a beard as long and as bushy and as Simon Mason as you might like it, actually. If you don't know who Simon is, he's got a fabulous beard and he's a lovely man. But if you do, aren't you lucky? Because I do, and he gives the best hugs. Today, I am going to be talking about an album which, and by the way, you are going to be absolutely bloody sick of hearing about this band this year, because this year is the 30th anniversary of the release of their Parklife album. And in about 2 months' time, the newspapers are going to be absolutely full of 30 years of Britpop and all that crap. And I was there. Now, the cliche is, if you can remember it, it wasn't that good. Well, I can remember it, and it wasn't that good. Or more correctly, if you can remember it, you weren't there. I can remember it. I was there. It wasn't that good. Yeah, let's put it that way. So, the album I'm talking about today is only 31 years old, and that makes it quite new in my record collection. It is Blur's second record, Modern Life is Rubbish, an accurate statement of the state of the world in 1993. And I think probably the best thing to say is I wasn't a huge fan of Blur at this point in time. I absolutely wasn't. I could see them for what I thought they were, and I kind of moved into liking them more over time. In fact, a lot of the stuff about Blur is retrospective. I was very aware of them at the time. I saw them live. I had some of the records, well, CDs, because CDs were cheaper. Or more correctly, my then girlfriend had the CDs, which meant that I had the CDs, which sounds a little cynical until you realise that when you live with somebody, you kind of share their CD collection. And I kind of became aware of Blur by listening to them through her collection. So I hope you're doing okay out there. You're almost definitely not watching this, but I hope you're doing fine. What a splendid person they were. And what fantastic taste I had in girlfriends at that point in time, 1993. So let's talk about Modern Life is Rubbish. And more correctly, the precursor single to that, Popscene. All right, this is the CD that comes from the 1999 Blur X box set that features CD replicas in card sleeves of all the band's singles and single tracks at that point. I didn't bother buying the singles because Blur B-sides aren't and weren't particularly good. Instead, I bought the box set when it came out. I was earning money at that point, and that seemed like the right thing to do. I think it's fair to say Popscene was not what anyone else was expecting at the time. So before that, we had the singles She's So High, There's No Other Way, and the frankly awful Bang, a song about nothing that communicates nothing and doesn't do it very well at all. Popscene was the first single where I thought Blur was starting to step outside of and be interesting. The first album, as I mentioned previously around the conversation about Leisure, is an album that felt to me like it had been focus grouped and squashed like a bonsai kitten, with baggy drum beats that didn't really belong there, generic covers, poor songs on the album that was commercial. The band never had a degree of control over Leisure that they probably should have done. And if they'd have had that degree of control, they either would have fallen dramatically and exploded like a roller coaster flying off into the sea on fire, or they would have become much bigger much sooner. But I think people that like music or liked music at that point had a finely honed bullshit detector. And if someone's being insincere, you can kind of smell it, you can kind of see it, and you can kind of go, I don't believe you. This isn't honest in terms of who you are. This isn't an accurate reflection of where your heart really lies. And that's how I felt about Leisure, as it felt like it had been converted into something that wasn't what the band was or what the band could be. Modern Life is Rubbish felt to me like it was a much more honest record and a much more realistic one, whereas Leisure was a bit crap, truth be told. And Popscene was the first one where I actually heard it and went, they might be better than The Farm. Now that sounds bitchy. Who, me? I know. But I listened to it and I thought, there's something going on here and it's better. than everything else that the band have done so far. It really, really much better, actually. And I stand by that assessment to this day. So, sorry, mucking about with a microphone. Popscene is the first really great Blur single, I think. The B-side's not so great. The B-sides are Mace, Badgeman Brown, I'm Fine, and Garden Central. And I might have talked about them a couple of months ago on the previous episode. Badgeman Brown is I think, very much an emulation of Syd Barrett, early Pink Floyd, and the track Corporal Clegg by the Pink Floyd on the Source Full of Secrets album. It wears its influences pretty fucking obviously on its sleeve. And this is where actually I get pretty annoyed, because Graham Coxon felt that Bernard Butler was copying him. Bernard Butler from Suede, by the way, which absolutely wasn't the case at all. When you draw from the same pot of influences and you come up with some similar ideas, sometimes people think that you're copying somebody when actually you're not. You're just doing a process called simultaneous discovery. Simultaneous discovery is something that exists in art, it exists in science. So you think about the difference between, let's say, Tesla and Edison, or perhaps between Deep Impact and Armageddon. Both people operating independently, arriving at the same place, coming up with the same idea. Sometimes it just happens. Also, other examples, Full Metal Jacket and Platoon, for example. Full Metal Jacket had finished shooting before Platoon had even started, I think. But Platoon came out first. Everyone thought Full Metal Jacket was copying Platoon when it clearly wasn't. It's that type of thing. Popscene is, put technically, a banger, and it's got a great sound, really compelling, propulsive sound. I really love it. It's the first song where I listened to and I thought, yeah, Blur have got something here. They're much better than people give them credit for. It took me a little while to be fully converted. In fact, I'm not sure I still am, actually. But I definitely went from being aware to being interested. And in 1992, on the back of Popscene, the band played what was called the Roller Coaster Tour. So they supported Jesus, Mary Chain, Dinosaur Jr. and My Bloody Valentine in arenas in the UK. And then they also played that dreadful American tour to sell T-shirts to make up for the accountancy fraud that took place. They recorded an album straight off that, and the album was finalised, but it was rejected by Food Records because there weren't enough singles. So the album had on it, Sunday Sunday, it had a number of other tracks on there, some of which appeared on the album, some of which weren't on the record, some of which only really got a release on the Rarities CD that's in the Blur 21 box set. So for example, you can look at the second CD on there and you can see some of the songs which were clearly going to be on Modern Life is Rubbish but didn't quite make it. One was called Never Clever. Never Clever was earmarked as a potential single. It eventually got a release on this CD, the Food 100, to celebrate Food Records' 100th release. And this came out in 1997 as a promotional CD. It wasn't sold. There's no barcode on there. So for a long time, that was the only place you could get Never Clever on CD, officially in the studio recording. And it became quite expensive for a period of time. Other songs that were going to be on the album that didn't appear on there, I mean, originally Popscene was on the 1992 configuration of the album. I think Death of a Party had been recorded but decided not to go for it. Pressure on Julian, Colin Zeal, Sunday Sunday, I think, was on there as well. Never Clever, Advert, Star-Shaped, things like that. But some of those songs just didn't make it onto the record, including Coping. Well, Coping was on there, 7 Days, for example. Those type of things. I'll get to that when I get to CD 2. I don't want to, put technically, shoot my bolt before and overshoot. That would be disastrous. Effectively, the album was finalised. It was going to be called, if I remember correctly, I've written this down. I really need to look and find it. It might have been called Miss America. It could have been called something else, actually. I'm not quite sure. But the idea was that it was going to be an album that was going to... It wasn't Modern Life is Rubbish. It was like 2/3 Modern Life is Rubbish and some tracks which then went relegated and became B-sides. But what the problem was is that at that point, still the record company was still interfering. They were still saying, you haven't written enough singles, you haven't got enough material. And the album was rejected, I think, probably December 1992. And whilst Blur had been swiftly exposed as baggy ambulance chasers, on their previous record. This was them going hell bent for leather and going for broke and going, look, if we only make one record, this is it. This is the one we want to stand by. Because if we chase the previous configuration, if we chase the sound which is already dated by the time the record had come out, then they were like, well, there's really no point. Modern Life is Rubbish is effectively Blur's second debut album. It's the album where the band felt like, to me, that they were actually themselves for the first time, as opposed to, dressing up on a first date to meet the world and not really being honest with themselves. They've done their hair a certain way. It's not really who they are. That's what had happened. There was still, as I said, there was still record company interference, which had flattened the band's personality. And Modern Life is Rubbish was a violent course correction against that. There was a contempt for America as they tried to succeed in grunge land, and they eventually were playing to, small rooms very drunkenly to people and not making very much money in order to sell T-shirts on a tour in America. And they really kind of pushed back against that. So they had 44 dates in 46 days. So you play 23 shows in a row or 17 shows in a row and you have a day off, and then another 17 shows, and then you have 7 shows, and then that's it. And I mean, I've seen bands 6, 7, 8 nights in a row, especially when I was in my 20s. That was tough, and I wasn't even doing the singing. You'd just get very, very tired, especially if you're commuting hundreds of miles in the desert in a shitty van across America going 55. Even though Sammy Hagar tells you he can't drive 55, 55 is the speed limit. I learnt that by watching that Burt Reynolds classic, The Cannonball Run. So this second debut, which effectively happened with Modern Life is Rubbish, very few bands get a second debut. Suede got one with Coming Up. Morrissey had one with Viva Hate after the Smiths. Joy Division and New Order. New Order had effectively a second debut in Movement, which was not only Joy Division's third album, but New Order's first. You could argue that Kraftwerk had a second debut with Autobahn. The idea of doing a course correction and a reset and going, no, this is who we are. But the working title of the album, Britain versus America, not Miss America, Britain versus America, was nixed. And they said, it's not going to work, it's going to piss off all the Americans. Whereas the band were probably like, we don't really care. They were very, very violently anti-grunge. So anti-Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Mudhoney, Tat, all of those bands. And when I talk about Nirvana's Nevermind, which is an upcoming episode, ladies and jelly spoons, I'll get to that. But at the time that Modern Life is Rubbish came out, it was almost like a violent course correction to go, America, you've had your time. And you've said your piece, and now it's time for Britain to bite back. That's how it felt, certainly for me. There was that awful cover of Select where Brett Anderson was superimposed behind a Union Jack, which he really didn't like and thought was tasteless, and absolutely agreed with him and didn't consent to it. And then there was the idea that Britpop, a phrase coined by, I think, Stuart McConey, was going to come around as a rise of the British voice again after having been flattened by America. Of course, in the cultural homogeny that is Western pop music or rock music, depending on your points of view, countries like France, Germany, Belgium, Australia actually get a very, very small role in the conversation. It's a kind of like a seesaw between America and Britain, and obviously more to America these days. But it's the same thing with films. You either have films that are set in Britain and everyone's really repressed and they don't show any emotions and have trembling moustaches, or it's in America where everyone's a bit gaudy and they have very expensive cars that do about 400 yards to the gallop. It sounds a little flippant, but that's absolutely where it is. And after Britain having had such a dominant role in culture previously, so you can think about like major movements in the 80s, New Romantics in the early 80s, punk in the late 70s, the Beatles between 1960 and the end of time, those type of things. America kind of went back and went, we want music that reflects us. And Blur went, we want music that reflects us, and we want music that reflects London and Britain, and created an aspirational version of Britain on the record that didn't necessarily exist, certainly not in if you listen to albums like Verses or 10 or Louder Than Love, those type of things. There was very little Britishness in that. So there's an inherent characteristic that sits inside a nation. Sounds a little weird, but when you think about nations, you think about, well, if you thought about the Dutch, what would you think about the Dutch apart from fantastic pastries? There are plenty of other things about them, by the way. if you thought about too much about America, you'd kind of go, oh yeah, maybe bad food, loud rock music, invented the blockbuster movie in 1975 with Jaws, that type of thing. Britain, it was like, what's Britain about? Well, it's about emotional repression. It's about creating empires, invading other countries, stealing all of their precious Elgin marbles, being a bit dodgy, that type of stuff, never showing emotions in a built-up area. So Modern Life is Rubbish was effectively the band with a contempt for America, creating an album about what it was like to be British. And it kind of worked. And at the same point, I kind of listened to it and I went, it's too British. It's quite restrictive. It doesn't talk about, for example, universal cultural experiences apart from on an emotional level. There are words, there are languages, there are phrases which are used in this album which don't reflect actually the universal experience. So, for example, references to Primrose Hill, to Regent's Park, to places where, unless you've been there, it's a thing that's on a map that you've never heard of. You've maybe seen a picture in a history book. And then it becomes very provincial and very local. And I don't like that part of music at all, which is why the music I like generally is not strongly aligned to a national identity. This will become problematic when I start talking about Oasis. And I think I will talk about Oasis at some point, just not yet. So the album was rejected. Food said you need a couple of extra singles. Pretty much overnight, the band wrote 2 new songs, the first 2 singles from the album. For Tomorrow, an absolute classic, and Chemical World. Not quite a classic, but pretty good. And Andrew Partridge from XTC, a band that I love, recorded the early part of the record. So there are 3 or 4 songs that they recorded with Andrew Partridge from XTC producing on the double CD of Blur 21. That is Coping, Sunday Sleep, 7 Days, which are all released on here. But the label said, don't really like those, want to have some extra songs. Stephen Street became the band's producer of choice. Stephen Street, who you will have seen from producing The Smiths and Morrissey and co-writing a huge chunk of Morrissey's debut LP, Viva Hate, which I talked about in a previous episode. And that was fine. Really liked it. SBK, the American label, nincompoops that they were, wanted it re-recorded a 3rd time. This time re-recorded with Butch Vig, the producer of American pop youngsters Nirvana, and later on to be part of Garbage. And also, by the way, the guy that remixed House of Pain, Shamrock and Shenanigans, did an amazing version of that. That one sounds fantastic when it cranked up in a nightclub. Butch Vig. And I think Blur's response had 3 F's in it, 7 letters, and 1 space. So they went back in, they wrote For Tomorrow and Chemical World. They added those onto the album. And then America said, Chemical World's quite good, isn't it? But we prefer the demo to the finished LP mix. So after saying we want that, they then changed so that the configuration for Modern Life is Rubbish in America features Popscene. It also features an alternate studio recording of Chemical World. That alternate studio recording of Chemical World, by the way, later appears with some overdubs and being remixed for the reworked version that's on the CD single of Chemical World. So if you listen to the reworked version and go, sounds like a glorified demo, it is. Right. Important thing about the title for this album, it's Modern Life is Rubbish, not Modern Life is Trash. It's very clearly signposting to you, this is a British record about British things, right down to the cover, the imagery, and everything that goes in it. So on the cover, by the way, we have a photograph taken from a photo library. It's a stock image of a train. This train is called, and let me quickly check, the Mallard. It's one of the best British steam trains. If you're into trains, this is the wrong YouTube for you. But this is the Mallards, which is one of the most magnificent British steam trains that there is. I think it's at York Railway Museum at the moment. And again, this is a stock photo. It's a photograph of a painting that was done in about 1956 ish, and I really should have checked that before I said this. In the same way that also the stock imagery that we've got for tomorrow, for example, is clearly a painting of a Spitfire, or by the look of it, might be, no, that's a Spitfire, World War II fighter plane over the clouds of Britain. Again, very clearly signalling these are British things. It would be like putting a B-52 on a cover of a B-52's records. It's pretty obviously going, that's American. Whereas some of the other songs, and these are a little slyer, a little more obvious, Chemical World, very clearly a Ferrari in front of the Gaudy Bridge in, I think that's Brooklyn, alongside the Ferrari symbol, the horse there. And on the cover of Sunday, I'm hungry just looking at that. That is, what, 4 burgers. It's a good thing I've eaten, because otherwise I definitely would have had to take a bite out of the CD. But the idea of kind of making not necessarily subtle commentaries upon consumerism, ownership, consumption, visuals around the way in which these are basically adverts for songs. Obviously a record cover is an advert for a song, but these covers seem to be designed to communicate an idea around what the contents are and the cultural systems that they're referring to. Chemical World being about America, and Sunday being about, you know, consumerism and huge burgers. Oh, I love burgers. I haven't had one for ages. And as I've said, it's called Modern Life is Rubbish. Rubbish is a particularly British word. Otherwise, it would be called Modern Life is Trash or Garbage. And it isn't. Rubbish is a particularly British word. There are some words that very clearly belong in the British lexicon that have been imported into other countries, and you kind of go, that's a British word. Schadenfreude is German. Rubbish is British. Nincompoop is British. And oh man, we as in small, that's Scottish, for example. Or dapper, I think, is Welsh, for example. These are particularly provincial words that communicate ideas about particular places and spaces in our minds. So it's all there. And relax. 28th, well, April 1993, the first single from the album is released. This single is called For Tomorrow. This is a Blur classic. After Popscene, I was like, okay, like the gif of, or GIF, depending on who you talk to, of Leonardo DiCaprio going, okay, you have my curiosity, now you've got my attention. For Tomorrow got my attention. I was like, okay, this is interesting. Not as good as Suede, still not as good as Suede. Nothing is as good as Suede, but interesting. And I was kind of in there and I was going, right, now I'm paying attention. This is interesting. This is something I didn't necessarily see coming. If you'd listened to the band that had made Bang 2 years before and then went in For Tomorrow, and you go, did Vince Clarke leave and Martin Gore join? What happened? You guys, you changed. And it's a fabulous song. It's a huge epic about the future and holding on for tomorrow and thinking about what that future is going to be, and living in a city and having dreams and trying to make a future for yourself. Really great track with a fabulous ending. The version that's on the extended version, the Journey to Primrose Hill mix, Visit to Primrose Hill extended mix, by the way, according to the back of this CD, is the definitive take of the song. Absolutely magnificent. I love it to bits. B-sides, Blur hadn't yet mastered the art of writing amazing B-sides, and one could argue they never actually did. So the B-sides on this are Into Another, Hanging Over, Peach, Bone Bag, When the Cows Come Home, Beachcomber, and an acoustic version of For Tomorrow. And they're not great. Okay, they're not great because at this point, multi-formatting was rampant. So, for example, for every release that you'd have a 7-inch, you'd have a 12-inch, you'd have a cassette, you'd have a CD, you'd have 2 CDs, you might have 2 12-inches, and they'd want exclusive B-sides in every single one of them, so you could buy all the B-sides so you could get to the top of the charts. And they were all massively discounted. They were like $1.99 for a CD, 99p for the 7-inch. 7-inch was probably coloured vinyl. It would cost more than that to make, and it would then be charged to the band, and then hopefully by rising up the charts, the single would get the attention of the people that bought the CDs, which is where the money was. And so that was how it would work. But you would end up having, 8, 12 B-sides per single. And if you do 3, 4 singles and you end up with something like 36 B-sides, you are, to put bluntly, knackered. And you've got nothing to say by the time you get to the end of that process. And Blur were a band that really made good albums not good B-sides. There's some great B-sides, by the way, but not many. There's a lot of songs we listen to go, I know why that's a B-side. I really know why that one's a B-side. And that is where I have to get a little bit bitchy about it. So the tracks are on there, as I said. Into Another was also known as Headist. That was recorded under that title in a slightly different arrangement for a 1992 BBC session. That is on the single To Music Is My Radar, which I'm afraid to say I forgot to take off the shelf and is approximately over there somewhere. So you're just going to have to pretend that I'm showing you a copy of the Music Is My Radar single with Headist and Into Another on the B-side there, which I'm not. There you go. You can fool yourself. There you are. Isn't that nice? Yeah. Oh, lovely. And it's not great. Those B-sides, they just aren't. Sorry, I wish they were, but they aren't. In fact, some of the B-sides from some of the periods are so not amazing, they don't even make it onto the 2 CD edition of the album. I'll get to that in a couple of singles time. And then the album came out on, let me guess, 10th of May 1993. It got to number 15 in the UK charts. It sold 40,000 copies in 1993. It sold 19,000 in America, and it was released in December 1993. 7 months later, with Popscene and Chemical World added onto it. It didn't hit the US Top 200. It sold 68,000 less copies than Leisure, which sold 84,000 copies in the US, I think, maybe 88,000 or something like that. It sold a lot less copies than Leisure. So for every copy of Modern Life is Rubbish that they sold in America, they sold five or four. They sold four. Sold 4 copies of Leisure for every copy of Modern Life is Rubbish. The drop-off was big. Absolutely right. And what you could clearly see from listening to this album is the influences. So as I've said, with the flattened kind of baggy drum beats that have been kind of taken out from the LP, and you've got actual drums played by actual Daves on here, you can really hear the influences of the band. So the Cardiacs, you can hear Pink Floyd, you can hear, especially Syd Barrett, you can hear Elvis Costello, you can definitely hear the influence of the Specials in here. There's a lot of stuff that's on here that is really reminiscent of the Specials' second album, More Specials. I'm not a huge Specials fan. I know they're good, they just don't push my buttons or flick my switches, to use management speak. The idea of breaking the album up into sides, having intermissions, starting and beginnings, another track called Intermission at the end of side 1 and Commercial Break at the end of side 2, kind of acting as little interstitial pieces. In those days, they'd be called, punishment tracks, is what I heard them described. Effectively, you know, the skit tracks on rap songs that you listen to once and you kind of go, or rap albums, and you go, it's not very good, is it? Why did they put that on there? I don't know. It's not funny. You listen to it once and you go, it's not funny, and then you listen to it the 19th time and you go, I'm going to take that one out of my iTunes playlist of the album. More Specials has a couple of instrumental tracks that bridge other songs that are inside there. There's also a track on the B-side, I think it's a Ghost Town called, I think something like Friday Night, Saturday Morning, which is apparently hugely influential on this album. The idea of observing and watching other people from a third party point of view, and that's the songwriting by Damon that I dislike the most. The idea of observation, but it's almost a lot of Damon's lyrics which are observational. Colin Zeal, Pressure on Julian, Yuko and Hero, all those type of songs. Tracy, basically any track named after a person. And a lot of the other ones, including Stereotypes, there's an element of kind of observing other people for 2 reasons. Firstly, you've got nothing to say about yourself. And the second one is this element of going, oh, look at the little people in their little houses. Aren't they weird and quirky? I'm going to judge them. And there's not very much sympathy in some of the lyrics which come through in parts of the album. And it feels almost a little bit cruel, a little bit like, well, I don't have to work for a living. I can be in a band. You have got to work for a living because you're not as brilliant as me. I'm going to look at your life and I'm going to laugh a little bit about it. How terrible it is to have a wife that you don't like and to go to wife swapping parties and to have to wear suspenders underneath your civil servant bloody outfits. And I end up just wanting to go, mate, smug is not a good look, okay? Be a little bit fucking sympathetic to the people that are in your songs, because those are, if they're not real, the characters are real to them. And that's the thing in narrative that I absolutely hate, is when you have something that's being written and someone's kind of judging someone. Now, unless the guy is some kind of wanker loser Nazi in a basement somewhere, running some kind of weird, fucked up website or tweeting at people that they're pedophiles or something, then okay, laugh at them, because that is genuinely pathetic. But if it's some guy that's going to work and earning a salary and has to do that, and, you know, wears nice girls' clothes underneath his actual clothes, and he's called Tracy Jacks or whatever, don't laugh at them. That's rotten. That's cruel. Of course, when you've got comedy, the point about comedy is always to punch up, not to punch down. Punching down is bullying. Punching up is speaking truth to power. And as long as you are speaking truth to power, that is okay. If you aren't speaking truth to power and you're just pointing at the funny people and laughing at them because they're different from you, that's not funny, it's not insightful, it's cruel. Unless they're Nazis. Sorry, if any Nazis are watching this, fuck off. I don't ever want to see your face on this channel ever again. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I got to be who I am, right? And you got to be who you are. And who you got to be if you're a Nazi is not watching this. So, without any further ado, let's move on to the second track on the album before I end up down a rabbit hole of conspiraloon nonsense. And that is, the second track is Advert. Advert, if you are a fan of the fabulous British comedy duo Adam and Joe. Advert was used as interstitial music on the Adam and Joe show, which was some of the best television that was ever on British television in the 90s. Absolutely essential watching. I loved it, love it still. Irreverent, kind, nice-hearted, daft, perfect post-pub television. Third track is Colin Zeal on the album. And it's an observation of an imaginary man written in a third person, looking at them and a bit judgmental. I don't like it. I think at some point, this was where Damon was going, I would rather have been working in a fucking office, is what he said in the book 3862 Days. Rather than working in an office than working in a band. And I'm sat there going, if you'd ever worked in an office, you would know that you'd much rather be in a band and doing what you wanted to do and making music for a living than sat there with Colin from accounts. Sorry, Colin. And worrying about, you know, am I going to get laid off or whatever. It's nonsense. Surely Blur were kind of thinking, yeah, I might get laid off. The band might split. We might run out of money. I might have to go and get a day job. But at least then you had that thing. You tried it and it didn't work, which is better than not ever being able to try it. Which is almost what the greatest minds of my generation turned into Uber drivers and DPD delivery people because of money and power. And the fact that you've got that job, that ability to make music, you've got a record contract, it's a fucking privilege. Do not abuse it. Absolutely do not. So, track 4, Pressure on Julian. It's called Pressure on Julian. It's Dave Valve, who was the one of the co-founders of Food Records. I think played keyboards in the Teardrop Explodes with a guy called Julian Cope. It's a reference to Julian Cope and the pressure on Julian Cope to follow up the hits like Rewards with more hits, which he didn't do. And it's interesting and pretty sly comment about that. Somehow the man got away with it. Then we have track 5, which is Star-Shaped. Andy Partridge did not like Star-Shaped at all. And if I remember correctly, and let me quickly look at CD2, it is not in the Andy Partridge versions that were finalised or finished. On here, it just exists in an alternate film and a demo on the Blur 21 mega set. And then we had Blue Jeans. Oh, what is Blue Jeans about? Well, I'm glad you asked. Not that you did. Blue Jeans is around going shopping for jeans in Notting Hill. It's nice to know you've got an important artistic statement to make with your work. It really, really is. So there. And then we have Intermission, again following the observational and interstitial approach from More Specials, before you then slip into, oh no, I've missed Chemical World. Oh, Amateur Hour, forgive me. Chemical World, last track, side 1. Second single from the album. It was released as a single in June 1993. Here is the CD from the Blur X box set. This only got to number 28 in the UK charts. It actually charted higher in America. It got to number 27. And it was the remixed, reworked version of it on the second CD or 12 inches, as I said, the overdub demo. So the demo version is on the American on the American album. The reworked, remixed version of the demo is on CD 2 on here, and also on the extended formats for the original single release. And it was not great. I mean, Chemical World is okay, but it's not stunning. It's fair to say. It works quite well live. I quite like it. But at the same point, it is, especially when they play at a gig. I haven't seen Blur for a few years, but when they play at a gig and you kind of sit there and go, everyone's just waiting for you to play Park Life and Girls and Boys, aren't they? So Chemical World is kind of like the punishment track that you have to go through if you're just a Blur casual, really. That's pretty harsh. The B-sides of Chemical World, by the way, has the best Blur B-side of all time. Yes, I will fight you if you disagree with me, because Young and Lovely is on here. It's an amazing song. It should have been on the album. It's one of my favourite Blur songs. It's just this lovely, sweet song about being young and lovely and in love. And we need more optimism in the world. We really, really do. Misery is easy. Optimism is hard. So Young and Lovely is one of my favourite Blur songs. We also have Eschmet, which is not great. My Ark, which is not great. A cover version of Maggie fucking May. I hate Rod Stewart. He's awful, crass, unimaginative. All of his songs seem to be about his penis, and utterly lacking in, I think, insight or sophistication. It's like if someone took a Range Rover and forced it to sing. And then on the CD too, which is also on this CD, you've got the reworked version of Chemical World. You have a track called Never Clever, which I last pointed out is on here. A live version of Never Clever, which is taken from Glastonbury, Pressure on Julian, and Come Together. Never Clever, by the way, was earmarked as potentially the first single from the album before For Tomorrow was written, which, considering it never actually got a studio release until several years later, and they were literally giving it away at that point, it's pretty surprising. But really, really interesting. So that's Chemical World, which I've jumped forward in the chronology a teensy-wincy little bit, like an incy-wincy little Britpop spider. And then you go to Intermission, then over to Side 2. Side 2 opens with Sunday, Sunday, third single from the album. Sunday, Sunday. Here is your Blur X CD box set version of it. Lots of bloody B-sides. And the B-sides on Sunday, Sunday are Dizzy, Fried and Shimmer, which, if I remember correctly, are on this CD, the original Sunday, Sunday CD single from 1993. They aren't on any of the reissues, by the way, Dizzy, Fried and Shimmer. They've been kind of excised out of reality because they are tracks by Seymour, the pre-Blur band, when Blur realised they'd run out of demos and they'd run out of songs to pad out the extra formats to make you buy them, so they had to put this on there. But no, Dizzy, Fried and Shimmer are not great. They are probably the least worst of the Seymour demos, but that doesn't mean they're any good, by the way, because when you get to CD 1 of the Blur 21 box set, your Seymour rehearsals are Dizzy, Mixed Up, Birthday, Sing to Me, Fool, and She's So High. So you don't get that version of Fried, and you get an alternate version of Dizzy, and I don't think Shimmer's on here at all, which is both a shame, and having heard Shimmer, it isn't a shame. It's not a great track. And then on the second CD of Sunday, Sunday, which, by the way, got to number 26 in the charts, so the highest charting of the singles from the album, released in October 1993, are, Daisy Bell, a bicycle made for two, and Let's All Go Down the Fucking Strand, mate. Another bit of Cockney bollocks, which is very provincial and very local. And since I didn't live in London, to me, it was kind of like going, yeah, London's great, London loves, but what about the rest of Britain, man? Because really, it should be called London is Rubbish, not Modern Life is Rubbish, is there. So there's also Long-Legged, Mixed Up, and Tell Me, which are also, I think, Seymour era demos, which were on the on some of the extended formats of Sunday, Sunday. Not great. Daisy Bell and Let's All Go Down the Fucking Strand have been regarded as the worst moments of Blur's recorded career by a member of the band, who I don't think was ever named, but did say that in a magazine article. We haven't even started on side 2 of the record yet. I really need to get my wiggle on into it. So we have Sunday, which is quite good. Again, it's a song where you could see Blur becoming who they were going to be, like a status of evolution. Like when you see a fetus and you start to see arms and legs and noses, and you kind of go, oh, you're going to become a human. And it's like that kind of thing. And you can kind of see what they're going to become. And sometimes seeing the potential is really, really exciting. I listened to this and I kind of went, if they carry on in this trajectory, they're going to be really good. They might even be better than Shed 7. Don't worry, I fucking hate Shed 7. Shed 7 didn't even exist when this came out. But it was like, they really could be a very good band. Of course, in another world, Blur never made Park Life. They split after Modern Life is Rubbish. And right now they will be headlining the Lexington, playing the album in full for its 30th anniversary to 250 people, charging £22.50 for the privilege, and counting themselves lucky they got enough annual leave left at work. That's not how history unfolded, because we've still got side 2 of Modern Life is Rubbish, and we have, as I said, Sunday, which is effectively an exercise in misery. It's a way of exploring the idea of going, everything is repetitive, it's really boring, this is becoming a job. Being in Blur, it is not fun, and that's an awful place to be, especially if it's something that you've wanted to do all your life. But then on the other hand, you have a track like Colin's Eel where you're looking at people that do actually have a day job and going, I bloody hate that too. So it's like, is it human nature to not be satisfied with anything, no matter what it is? The short answer is, I don't really know. I'm trying to work it out myself, and when I get to be a grown-up, I'll tell you. We then have Oily Water, which is track 2 or track 9 on your CD, which first appeared on the Volume 2 compilation. Volume 2 is up there on a shelf, and that song got a huge amount of use because it was recorded in 1991 in the early sessions, and then reused later on. We have Miss America, which, by the way, the credit for Miss America says Dave is in the plough, which is a nice way of saying he was drunk in the pub and couldn't play drums. So, and then we had Villa Rosie, which track 11, which is about a secret pub or a watering hole. So there are, or at least there were, after hours lock-ins, secret pubs, back rooms of places that you could go and drink. And it's become a lot more regulated now. It's a lot more difficult to have secret pubs, because everyone's putting it on Instagram going, I'm in a secret pub, and someone's going, secret pub? It's not a secret anymore, is it? Nope, that's not the point. We have track 12, Coping, one of my favourite Blur tracks, and I know this is a favourite Blur track of one of my friends, Chelsea. Hello, you're not going to watch this, but hi. Which has an amazing lyric in it, which is, the emphasis is on coping. If you've ever had a difficult day, if you've ever thought, oh, it's the 4,000th of January and I haven't yet been paid. If you ever think like, how much longer have I got to go? Or to sit there and go, sometimes things feel like prison sentences. If you're in a job and you don't want to be in the job anymore, and you kind of go, your brain kind of goes, maybe, and then you kind of go, right, now I've got to find another job, then I've got to get another job, then I've got to get the offer, then I've got to hand my notice in, and I've got 6 months till freedom, I've got 3 months till freedom. The emphasis is on coping, is you do whatever you need to do in order to get you through the day to the next day, and then the next day, and the next day, and as they said in Rogue One, until all your chances are spent. That's how it is. The emphasis is on coping, on getting from one day to the next, day upon day upon day upon day. Still can't believe that song isn't on Leisure. And then Turn It Up, track 13, penultimate track on the album. Balfe insisted on it being on the album. Damon Albarn thinks it's crap. I'm somewhere in the middle between the two. It was demoed in 1991 alongside Oily Water, Popscene. And then we had track 14, last track on the album is Resigned. Resigned also was recorded at the same time. It was on the Food Christmas Party tape, which is up there on a shelf, I think, possibly there. And it's a great way of ending the album. It really is. And then we have Commercial Break to end the record. That is Blur's Modern Life is Rubbish. I think it's a really good album. It could be slightly better. I'd put Young and Lovely on it if I had the choice, put Popscene on it. I might take out a couple of other songs. But I'm not Damon, thank God, because the world would be very different and Blur wouldn't be headlining Wembley Stadium if I was Blur's singer. They just wouldn't. And I know that. That's okay too. That covers all the single releases. There was a number of other tracks that were released around the same time. I'm going to pick out one of these, which is a cover version of Oliver's Army by Elvis Costello. And I think that is on this, the Piece Together CD, a charity CD that was put together in 1993, used to create a trust fund to support the cross-community activities for young people in a then divided Northern Ireland, ahead of the Northern Ireland reunification that was mentioned in Star Trek, which is due to happen in 2024 this year, which, given what happened with Brexit, is not impossible. It would be a pretty stunning state of affairs for the Conservative Party to take Britain out of Europe, which of course it's already done, then also to piss off Scotland and Ireland so much that they both might leave as well, which is not impossible, by the way. It absolutely isn't. That's another conversation. Piece Together has a cover version of Elvis Costello's Oliver's Army, and it is perfectly cromulent, a word I know my brother hates, which is why I've used it, but it's also absolutely adequate. It's the sound of, like the cover version of The Who's Substitute, which is not on any reissue either, a song that was recorded for money because Blur needed money. And the idea was, well, you try to trade a day of your life, or you do a cover version and you record a song you don't particularly care about, don't particularly love, don't do a particularly great job of it, but you get £1,000. It's like, yeah, we'll do it. We need £1,000. So Substitute, by the way, the cover version of The Who, is so bad that Damon apparently refuses to have any copies of it in his house. Having heard it, I agree with him. It's fucking dreadful. And that's one of the reasons why it isn't on any of the reissues. It's really very bad, no good indeed. And relax. CD 2 of the rarities on the Blur 21 box set is effectively your unreleased tracks from the Modern Life is Rubbish period. This features a total of 20 songs from the period, which actually makes out to be a third CD, and that features an alternate version of I Love Her, demos of Popscene, Bleached Whale, Death of a Party, which became a fan club single, which I've got over there, a song called Pat Pop, demos of Pressure on Julian, Colin Zeal, Sunday Sunday, Never Clever, Advert, Star-Shaped, She Don't Mind, which is an early version of Blue Jeans, and then Andy Partridge versions of Coping, Sunday Sleep, 7 Days, early versions of Turn It Up, which is called Kazoo, the Wassailing Song, which was a 7-inch flexi disc given away at a gig at the Hibernian Club in Fulham, which is apparently one of the worst Blur gigs of all time. And then demos of When the Cows Come Home and early mixes of For Tomorrow and Magpie. These are probably all on streaming services. If they aren't, I'm sure you can find them somewhere. The box set is now deleted and expensive, and if you have about £400 to spare, buy it by all means. I paid £64 for mine when they had lots of boxes on lots of shelves, not sifting, about 10 years ago. The last thing I think we'll talk about, or I will talk about, because really this is a monologue, not a conversation, is the rivalry between Blur and Suede, which existed at the time. There was a rivalry between Damon and Brett Anderson, which Brett wasn't interested in. Justine, who had been a member of Suede, and then became Damon's partner and member of Elastica, Damon became jealous because Suede got a lot more public attention first, and saw a rivalry between Suede and Blur, which Brett wasn't interested in. Graham felt that Vernon Butler, Suede's guitarist, was copying him, which he wasn't. Vernon's influences, if you listen to them carefully, they are obviously Johnny Marr and people like Chic. The way that the rhythm and melody and leads are being used at the same time. Whereas Graham's playing is a lot more rooted in the era of things like post-punk, Syd Barrett, as I mentioned, Cardiacs, that type of stuff. But the idea of if you've got one guitar player that's going to be playing both rhythm and lead, well, who else has done that? Like pretty much every guitar player in every band that's not got 2 guitars. So you think about, for example, John McGough in Susie and the Banshees and Pill. For example, Johnny Marr, as I mentioned previously, Bernard Sumner, all doing that type of thing. So the idea that there was a rivalry, it was all one-sided. It was all seemed to be directed towards Suede from Blur's camp, which was uncharitable and childish. And I saw a documentary following Damon about in his studio, and framed up in his studio he has behind a frame a cartoon caricature of Blur, and the cartoon caricature of Brett looking a bit sad. And I was like, I'll fucking grow up, man. Really? You know, I mean, I might have had rivalries with people 30 years ago, but I certainly wouldn't frame if there was a cartoon picture of me lording it over them that had been in a magazine. I certainly wouldn't do that, because I'm not a child. Stop being so stupid. And if you haven't got a sense of humour about it, so some things which you really shouldn't have a sense of humour about, it's just not funny. So there you are. My sense of humour is far more towards Stuart Lee than it does Ricky Gervais, although sort of many of you have already worked that out. And later there was an Oasis versus Blur rivalry, which when I get to talk about Oasis is What the Story, Morning Glory, and Blur's Great Escape album, will no doubt you'll get my tedious and unwanted hot take about that. Overall, at this point, Blur were a good band, but the record didn't hit. Live was where it was happening. The gap between sales and love was huge. So people that saw Blur live loved them. The reception was rapturous. People that liked Blur and didn't see them didn't really get it. So there's two types of fan bases. There's the people that like a band, there's people that love a band. These days, when you're charging 80 quid for a ticket in a stadium, you've got to play to the people that like you as well as the people that love you. And yes, I'm talking to you, Morrissey, about your set lists, because they're perverse and unusual and a cruel punishment as defined by the Geneva Convention sometimes. But there's a difference between people that like a band and people that love a band. And at this point, the sales and the love weren't translating into anything more than that. Live was where it was happening. I first saw them at Finsbury Park in 1993, playing an acoustic set, just after For Tomorrow had come out, just after Modern Life is Rubbish had come out, a sports set alongside Belly, Sugar, Carter, Kingmaker, The Cure. Quite a lineup. And of course, I'm on the cover of the Great Expectations album, which I probably should have dug out from there and shown you, but I've done it before in the Cure episode about Wish, so it doesn't matter. I think the moment where people felt, or more correctly, where somebody in the band and the band's architecture felt something's really changing here, was the Reading Festival in 1993. Reading Festival in 1993 was headlined on the main stage by three bands, The, Susie and the Banshees, and New Order. That is a headline set that you could have got 10 years previously if The had been a gigging band. Blur headlined the tent, whilst The played on the big stage. And The, it is fair to say, were having a bad night. Some of the shows around about 1993 with a new and untested lineup, a new drummer, a new guitar player, a new bass player. The only guy that was left previously was the keyboard player, DC Collard. And it felt that The were starting to phase out of popular attention. You think about popular culture as being like a searchlight that goes over the world, and sometimes it will follow and track a band. And the band, whether they know it or not, suddenly kind of connecting to the moment that the rest of the world is feeling. That obviously happened with Nirvana and Nevermind. It happened with Oasis and What's the Story. It happened with Blur in 1994. The were a band that had maybe caught the zeitgeist and connected 1986, 1989, not 1993. So 1993, the spotlight was moving away from The. It was very definitely, they were starting to be on their descent away from the popular mindset. And Blur were very definitely on the ascent. And apparently 10,000 people kind of wandered away from The set, being unimpressed and going, we'll try Blur. Which means Blur played to 5,000 people outside the tent and 10,000 people inside the tent, as though they played to a crowd of around about 25,000 people in a field designed for about 40,000 people. And that must be a chastening moment if you're in one of those bands when you know that it's not going the way that you want it to. Not every fight is going to be won. Not every battle is going to be a success. But Blur, on the other hand, at the Reading Festival, I think they very definitely got the sense they were on the crest of a wave. And I've been in fandoms where you can see a band is about to do something enormous and magnificent, and you just kind of feel like you're riding on a surfboard over the moment, and you suddenly reach the top of the mountain and you can see everything ahead of you, and it's incredibly exciting to be a fan of a band when that happens. And that is what was happening, I think, for Blur at that point. The world was in the palm of their hands, and all they had to do was to stick the landing, which is the next record, called Park Life, which you'll hear all about probably at the end of March, when the album has its 30th anniversary, and you will not be able to bloody escape from Blur's Park Life record. And of course, everyone's going to go, it's not about your Versprung jerk technique, you know, etc., etc. But that is a tale for another time. That is me talking for 1 whole hour about Blur's second album, Modern Life is Rubbish. I hope that you enjoyed it, liked it, found it either worthwhile or not vastly boring. And I look forward to you watching future episodes of this, where I talk about other bands and other records. The next one, I haven't made my decision on what the next one's going to be actually yet, but I'm sure we'll get around to it at some point. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. If you like it, subscribe. If you don't, watch something else. Okay. Bye.